Welcome. I'm Laura Will. I'm a rare mom, and I'm a community advisor with No Rare, and just happy to. Gina and I have had the opportunity to interconnect on multiple projects for No Rare over time. Thank you, Gina, for being here. I'll start by reading your bio, and then we'll jump into conversation. So Gina here, Gina DeMillo Wagner, is an award-winning author who writes about sibling loss, disability and rare disease, estrangement, and the intersections of nature and nurturing. Her work has been featured in the New York Times, Washington Post, Memoir Magazine, Modern Loss, Self, Outside, Psychology Today, Hippocampus, and our No Rare blog. Her memoir, Forces of Nature, won a 2024 Best Indie Book Award as well as two Zibby Awards. Gina has her master's degree in journalism and is an instructor at Lighthouse Writers Workshop and Writers Digest University. And she lives and works near Boulder, Colorado. So thank you for being here, Gina. This is really fun to get to hold space for this time together.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I have such a soft spot for this community, and I'm really honored that you guys would have me.
Oh my goodness, we're happy to have you. And as we kind of think about this conversation today, I think we'll move in the direction of like a loose outline will be the experience of being a sibling right off the bat. We'll dive into what that burden is, some of the trauma. We will define a glass child and hear your reflections on what it was to survive childhood alongside a rare brother. And a mother struggling with mental health. And then we'll bring the conversation towards supports, what coping looks like for you and has looked like for you during different points in times, and the power of information, the power of boundaries, and then we'll circle back to where we are today. So, and I know that we talked about really wanting to use forces of nature as a reference and a touchstone throughout the conversation with the expectation that perhaps nobody has read the book yet. So I would love to maybe start off the conversation with a brief synopsis of the book.
So, my older brother, Alan, had a rare genetic disability, Prader-Willi syndrome. He probably had some other issues too, but that's what we came to understand. And it caused him to have really violent mood swings. He could be extremely loving one minute and then really terrifying the next. And his behavior was really unpredictable. And when he died suddenly at age 43, I was left with some questions. The biggest question was what happened? What went wrong? I think a lot of people, if somebody dies suddenly, that's the first thing you want to know is what happened and what went wrong. But given his disabilities, especially his intellectual disabilities, I didn't have access to his thoughts and feelings a lot or his interior world. So when he died suddenly, I wondered things like, did he know that I loved him? Could
Mm.
he feel that love? Did he understand that people could fear him and love him at the same time? I wondered if I had done enough as his sister and as his caregiver. I wondered if the systems that were designed to take care of him and protect him had failed in some ways. And some of those questions had answers, and a lot of them didn't. So the memoir is really me writing toward those questions, kind of writing into the unknowns and moving toward the unknowns. And what I discovered through writing the book is that the question of what happened to Alan is also a question of what happened to me and what happened to us growing up. So, what was my experience as a sibling? What did we mean to one another? Since he wasn't around and we weren't able to have those conversations about what we meant to each other as siblings, a lot of my writing was me trying to make meaning and give shape to the relationship. And then ultimately, once I finished the book, I realized that it really is for anybody who's grown up in not just rare families, but any sort of complicated family. It's kind of a little bit of a guidebook to, how much do we owe the people that we love the most? How do we define family and home? How do we define those relationships that are like so central to our lives when they don't look like, the poster template of what you think they should look like? So yeah, so the book is, again, not everything's answered, but it's kind of an exploration of all of those things and complicated grief. How do you grieve a complicated relationship?
That is a fantastic jumping off point. So, thank you for the synopsis. Your book really does read like a mystery novel. Like you're flipping back and forth through time as you reveal these unanswerable questions surrounding Alan's death, and his life with rare disease. And you really just beautifully describe uncertainty, as you work through and towards a version of acceptance. I can certainly feel your words reflected in my own experience of trying to understand my son's rare disease. And yeah, it's been an incredible touchstone. Some of your passages sit in my heart now. It does give a sense of a traumatic upbringing and some unmet needs of your own in the shadow of a rare sibling. And I'm curious, do you think of yourself as a survivor?
Hmm. Um, I haven't. I mean, it's when you grow up, your family, it's the air that you breathe. Like, even if there's a lot of trauma and a lot of violence and a lot of dysfunction, it's not really till you get older that you understand that maybe that's not the way things are supposed to be. So, certainly growing up, I didn't think of myself as a survivor. And even into like adulthood, it's just the way that things were. And it's been a little bit more recently. I have kids of my own. And as I've done therapy my whole adult life, that I think I've come to like feel a lot of gratitude for the ways that I survived. I don't know that I wear, a badge of being a survivor, but I do like to acknowledge that somehow I did survive some things that were potentially life or death, and and I found a way to be a healthy adult and kind of create something for my kids that I wish that I had had. Yeah, it's not something I think about all the time, but I do feel really grateful to be here and that um and I think especially when you lose somebody that you're close to young, you think about that a lot. Like I've surpassed the age that he was when Alan was when he died. So I feel a real visceral sense of gratitude around that too, that I have survived longer than he was able to.
I'm really excited to dive into the transformation towards adulthood, but I'm going to hold back a moment before that. And I'd love to talk about what a glass child is, together. And to set up that conversation, I'm going to read from your book a brief passage, and it's right after you took a fall, a fairly normal childhood fall, and ended up needing stitches. So here you are in the emergency room. I lie perfectly still, staring at the fluorescent lights. I am quiet. Tears roll down my cheekbones and pool in my ears. At the end, the doctor tells me I'm the bravest little girl he's ever seen. He reaches into his white coat pocket and pulls out two lollipops and hands them to me. You hardly cried at all, Mom says triumphantly on the drive home. As a result, she says I don't have to share the suckers with my brothers. I deserve both. It's the first time I remember being rewarded for my ability to bypass pain, to not make a fuss, to endure. Years from now, I'll turn this over in my mind, the idea that I suppressed my feelings so skillfully, that I didn't create a scene, in that midst of trauma, I was able to be stoic. I'll admire this ability in myself, and I also loathe it. I wonder how many times I could have saved myself if only I had, in fact, made a fuss, thrown a fit, and drawn more attention from the adults around me. Am I correct in that passage getting at the concept of a glass child? And perhaps we could define that.
Yeah, yeah, we didn't have that term when I was a kid, and really it's only been in the past, I think, 4 or 5 years that I've even heard the term glass child. And it came out of a TED talk by Alicia. I'm going to forget her last name, but she's a sibling, and she gave a really amazing, insightful TED talk about the experience of growing up alongside somebody with chronic medical conditions and disability. And she coined the term glass child. And I have to admit, the first time I heard it, I bristled at that term. I didn't really felt like it fit because I associate glass with fragility. And what I've come to understand is that's not really what she meant. What she was referring to is this idea that it's the child that everyone sees through. It's the child that just gets lost in the mix. They're actually very strong and stoic, but the caregivers are so laser focused on the child who has the highest needs, not just medically. I mean, I think the term has kind of expanded to mental health needs and addiction needs and educational needs and all that. I think there's a lot of people that identify um, as being a glass child or a glass sibling in those situations too. Yeah, the adults tend to kind of look past the most capable, highest functioning kid. And so she kind of described the constellation of, you know, side effects of that, kind of what can happen when we don't see the other kids in the family system. And I think it's been useful for people to kind of give them some language around the experience.
I'm curious, have you learned how to make a fuss as an adult?
uh, it's an ongoing process. I still tend to. I mean, it's so automatic that I'm, attuned to other people's needs. It happens in work settings, it happens in social settings. So it's kind of a conscious effort to not only, I mean, and it's not even just about making a fuss, but I think like when you grow up, and I want to back up and say my experience obviously was very extreme. I know there's a lot of people who are currently raising rare kids who worry that they're doing it wrong, and they look at my story. I don't know if they feel judged or if they feel like it's a cautionary tale, but obviously, like my experience was very extreme, and I grew up before a lot of things, a lot of supports and terminology that exists now. But yeah, it's not just about making a fuss. It's that it was so automatic that I would mute my own needs and default to my brother and to my mother, who had her own untreated mental illness and her own issues. So I was caretaking her as well. I lost the ability to identify those needs. And
Mhm.
so a lot of what I do now as an adult is I have to kind of pause and say, okay, what do I need? Am I hungry? Like, I mean, like on the very basic level, I have to like really sit still for a minute and say, okay, I'm feeling something. What am I feeling? Is it hunger? Am I tired? Do I need to go for a walk? Like, I almost have to parent myself in that way and first identify what I need and then figure out how I can get that need met. So, no, I'm not like, I'm still a pretty quiet person, but yeah, I am learning how to take up more space in the world.
That's brilliant. I love that. And that is step one, right? Identifying your own needs.
Yeah.
But it's not as simple as we might think it is.
And
You
I think
right.
it happens in a lot of different families too. I mean, there's a lot of family systems where there's one person whose needs are the loudest. And it's not always because of rare disease. I think it's a good life skill for a lot of us.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's interesting as, as a parent of a child with rare disease, I feel that pull of that child who needs the most. And I think even without rare in the family, there's always a child that is demanding the most attention and often for good reason. And you need to supply the support for good reason. And what I think your book gets at is a really clear example of when the balance is lost or when there's a lack of transparency or communication within it.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
the transparency and communication piece, I think, is really important. And it's impossible, I think, sometimes to balance the scales perfectly. And I think sometimes we lose something when we try to make it perfect and even. But one thing that does help so much is just naming it and talking about it with all the kids, especially the typical siblings. I think, it's not about like trying to make it up to them or spoil them, but like having an honest, authentic connection with your kid, giving them space to talk about their feelings, naming it, not trying to fix it, not rushing to gratitude. I think that's one theme that I experienced, and as I've talked with a lot of siblings over the years, a lot of adults, not just parents, but teachers, a lot of adults that are kind of in contact with the family rush to silver lining and gratitude and like, oh, aren't you so lucky that you can ride a bike or that you get to go to summer camp or, there's a lot of things. And of course, we're grateful for that, of course, there's room for gratitude and for recognizing the things that we can do that our siblings can't. But I think the other piece of it, the other side of the coin is naming the painful parts of it. I wish I had more time with mom and dad. I wish I could play with my sibling the way that my friends play with their siblings. I wish we didn't have to go to the doctor every single week. I wish, we could have certain foods in the house. There's just a lot of ways that you can validate and name the experience that I think is really healing for kids and gives them the language, gives them the kind of full spectrum of the experience, gives them permission to experience the full spectrum of joy and pain that comes alongside this experience.
Absolutely. We do a lot of talking about holding two emotions in the same space in our family, and the kind of yes and philosophy of or conversation. Like, yes, this is difficult, like, and you get to ride your bike and your brother doesn't. I am curious as you're speaking to that gratitude piece with like, you get to ride your bike and your brother doesn't. How does guilt come into that? Is there, and how have you processed that through time?
Yeah, I think it's almost like a survivor's guilt. Even in moments of joy, there's always a little bit of sadness too. If you are thinking about your sibling and you wish that they could experience the same thing that you're experiencing. And then, for me, literally there's survivor's guilt since my brother passed away. But yeah, I mean, it's a complex constellation of feelings that exist all at the same time. And I think as you get older, as you get to be an adult, you see the nuance of it. Like, you know, my brother didn't have a lot of the capability of processing this out loud in the language. I know that there's a lot of folks living with disability and rare disease that can have those conversations. But I imagine that they would say that they feel lucky about some of the experiences that they had that their siblings couldn't have, like I think I don't want to like dismiss the gifts of some of these things that are delivered to us, some of the adversity. But what I hope is that we can make room for all of it.
Yeah. I feel like where we are in the conversation is so teed up for that passage that you had flagged. Do you want
Mm,
to take a moment and read that?
yeah,
It's like
yeah,
such a beautiful insight into the world of you and Alan together as siblings and young.
yeah. I'm happy to read this. This is a short scene from the book. I'm kind of reflecting on when my brother died, my son was 6 years old. And so I was kind of reflecting on the parallels between my kids' ages and mine and Alan's ages. And this is just one flashback that I can read. My son Miles is 6 years old, the age my aunt says Alan was supposed to die, and also a year older than Alan was thought to be intellectually. Intellectual age was something Alan was assigned by doctors over the years, based on milestones he reached, such as reading and writing, plus fine motor skills like tying his shoes. It was an imperfect measurement, but the only reference point we had. I struggle to remember Alan at age 6, not because I was 3, too young to remember much, but because Alan, in a sense, was always 5. While William and I transformed and matured, he was frozen in time. His intellectual age was an invisible barrier he never crossed, even as his body grew. I do have one clear memory. Atlanta, Georgia, summer of 1979. We are underwater. The voices of neighborhood children drift above us, muffled. We exist in a sea of chlorinated blue. I am treading water for the first time without my swimmies, those inflatable armbands that keep toddlers afloat. I'm dunking my body down and clawing my way back to the surface. I'm proud of this achievement. Nearby, Alan is diving to the bottom of the pool, collecting shiny pennies that my dad tossed in as a game. He lines them up evenly on the concrete edge. My mother is lounging on a plastic chase in the shade, far enough away that our splashes won't dampen her freshly set curls, but close enough to watch us swim. Baby Will is asleep next to her on a striped beach towel. The air smells like burnt hot dogs and cocoa butter. Alan is confident and graceful. He is upside down. He is spinning. He is pumping his legs and propelling his body through the water. He's pushing off the bottom and breaking through the pool's surface like a torpedo. He's unconcerned with the rivulets of water flowing down his thick brown hair, over his forehead and into his eyes. He refuses to wear goggles. He is laughing and squealing with delight. I am in awe. I want to do this too. Swimming is something Alan does better than me, and not just because he is 6 and I am 3. Swimming is something he will always do better than me, like a superpower. My parents are watching us. They are smiling. They're clapping every time Alan breaks the surface. They're looking around the pool deck at other parents, making eye contact as if to say, "Do you see the miracle happening here?" They're proud of me, sure, but more than that, they are amazed at their son, who is limited in so many ways, speech impaired, lacking balance and muscle tone, and yet so strong and graceful in the pool. It's like the water washes away his disability. Underwater, I observe my brother in slow motion. He's suspended in space and time. Alan is unafraid. I am unafraid. And so, for a moment, my parents are unafraid too. For a moment, we are tethered by our devotion to Alan, our sense of pride, the notion that maybe things will be okay after all. In my memory, this is the closest I've been to reverence for an older sibling, the closest I've felt to intense longing to be able to do something as well as he can. I'm too young to articulate it, but this experience instills in me a hope that will sustain me later in life when I need it the most. A belief that things can be better, that family could be a source of love, of safety, and happiness, not just fear, embarrassment, or pain.
My word. It's a beautiful passage.
Thank you.
I'm curious what advice you might have directly for parents of rare and chronic disease. I know that you are now a mother, and perhaps how has your childhood informed how you parent?
Yeah. I mean, we were talking before we got on. There's a lot of resources available now that didn't exist when I was a kid. And I think a lot of the pain that I experienced growing up might have been avoided if we had a bigger community, if there had been other adults kind of monitoring what was happening or who had been brave enough to speak up. But like in terms of advice for parents, aside from what we talked about in terms of naming things, being honest, acknowledging your limitations. None of us are superhuman. I don't think kids need us to be superhuman. I think they just need us to be present and they need to have their feelings validated. So some of that, is pretty basic. I I would encourage adults, if you're not already, to have your own committee of adults that you lean on so that you're not tempted to lean on your typical kids. Obviously, like the family's an ecosystem and there's a lot of caregiving that falls on everyone and some of that's avoidable, unavoidable, I should say. But I think the more that adults can have adults that they default to first before they lean on their kids for help with caregiving, and also let your kids kind of lead the way. A lot of kids want to help. I wanted to help. I wanted to be a little mom, But as adults, as parents, it's our job to kind of monitor that and make sure that kids are not, sacrificing too much of themselves to the larger cause of the family, that they've got their own outlets where they can be a kid, where they're seen and heard and their needs are met. And then the other thing I like to tell people, because I keep hearing this over and over and over again, and I know it's a really painful, difficult thing to have to consider, but if you're the parent of somebody who's going to need some sort of care well into their adulthood, do the planning now if you can, like have some sort of sense of what that's going to look like in the future. And I'm not just even talking about end of life planning, but are you going to look at a group home situation? Are you going to look at having some sort of community checking in on your child if they can't be independent and live alone? Because a lot of what happens, what I'm finding is that a lot of adult siblings, there's no conversation around it. They're just expected to become the guardian and the caregiver to their sibling, which many people are honored and eager to do. But when there's not a conversation around it, I think it can cause some conflict in the families. And when there's unspoken expectations around it, I think that that can be really difficult for families. So as much as you can, look ahead, I know that there's so many unknowns, but I would have those conversations sooner rather than later, and try to build your network of support so that it's not completely on the shoulders of one or two siblings, especially if it's somebody who is going to need a really high level of care into adulthood.
That's fantastic advice and not an easy lift for
No,
anybody.
no. And it's hard, I mean, because we don't even know what that's going to look like. Like my brother was in and out of group homes. He was on wait lists for group homes sometimes for 6 years. And then he
Mhm.
would go, and then 3 weeks later, he would be violent and he would be kicked out. So it's not like you can wrap up a neat plan and expect it to unfold. There's so many variables, but I do think it needs to be like an open, ongoing conversation for the parents to kind of, I don't know, imagine the most beautiful things, imagine what the best case scenario of what that might look like, and what can you do now to make that a reality.
Mhm. Mhm. And I love your concept of having, not falling toward at your children for support. And there's a delicate interaction with making sure that you're having authentic conversations around, you know, the difficulties of this. There's a tug and pull there where I want to be very honest with my children when the uncertainty feels large or when I feel scared, because they can pick up on that, right? But I also don't want to unload on them. So I do find it's this really fine balance.
Yeah. And it evolves as they get older. I mean, I think, one of the best things that a therapist ever told me is that you parent the child that's in front of you and the age that they are, and you answer the question that, I think a lot of times, at least for me, like when my kids would ask me a question that was really tricky or difficult, I wanted to like somehow illuminate the whole thing at once or make it all make sense. And I had a therapist who said, no, just answer the question that they're asking you in age appropriate terms, have the conversation that they're able to have. And then as I get older, my kids are teenagers now, we talk a lot more, and there's a little bit more flexibility in that, because they're older and more capable. So yeah, I think you can trust yourself as a parent too, that you'll grow and evolve alongside your kids, and you'll meet their needs.
I love that. And it is interesting. My rare child is in the middle, so I have an older and a younger. So I have a toddler who's looking at a brother in a wheelchair and, just figured out his G tube the other day and was like, what is
Mhm.
this? And it's so just inherent to his life with him. And there's this question in the back of my mind where, like, with Hadley, like, my elder, we discussed the G tube surgery, and it was kind of coming at us all together. And with my youngest, it's kind of already established. And I guess any thoughts on, and are there appropriate like intervals at which to sit down or how to approach that?
I don't, it's interesting. I think a lot about like birth order, and like, I mean, obviously my older brother was older than me. I was the middle child. We have a younger brother who was also typical. So as an adult, I reflect back and I'm like, I was born into, the aftermath of what, this discovery that my older brother had this disability. So I wasn't there, like you're saying, Laura, like I wasn't there for the conversations. And looking back, no one ever sat me down and said, hey, your brother has a disability and that's why things are hard sometimes, like it was never like I knew from looking at other families that there was something different and I knew about all the medical things, but there was never that like, and I don't think I needed like a really like my handheld or a really deep conversation, but I think just again naming it like, hey, your brother has this condition. It makes some things more difficult. It also makes him more joyful in these situations or like whatever. But just kind of narrating what it is that's going on. Yeah, like at what point I don't know. Like I feel like the you kind of know when your kids are asking or noticing. I don't know if you go. I don't know if you've had the experience of going out in public. Like it's we went out in public and I noticed other kids staring at our family and I was staring at other families. I was like, wait, why are they different? When really they were just a typical family. We were the ones that were, I put that in quotes, different because I think we're all different. But yeah, it was an interesting experience to kind of reflect back on. And I think it might have been really powerful. I mean, I'm guessing I was maybe like 3 or 4 when what I first started noticing is that I was hitting milestones that my older brother didn't. And so I think that was a good indicator that like I think I was asking like why can I do this and he can't. I was noticing that I had like surpassed him in some developmental milestones, and that would have been a good time, I think.
That sounds like a kind of sit down open space where a child could feel really comfortable would be helpful. And Kristen's question is, would you suggest we put our typical children into therapy at some point, even if everything seems fine, on the surface?
Yeah, I mean, I'm of the belief that more help is more help and more support is more support. I know that there's amazing therapists out there and there's therapists that are not so great. So it's not as easy as saying, yeah, like drop them into therapy. Like I think you have to find somebody who's, has some experience with families who are struggling with some adversity. But I strongly believe that kids, and I can't tell you what age, but like I think kids should have safe adults outside the family system that they can talk to. Because they might not feel, especially as they get older, they might worry about hurting someone's feelings. They might worry about adding to their parents' burden if they bring up any sort of struggles that they're having. But if they have access to another safe adult that they can talk to, I think that that's a great idea. I want to jump in and say, like, there's, it's not just therapy. There's, what I've come to understand as an adult is there's a bunch of support groups. Is that what you're going to talk about?
I was
There's,
going to talk about art therapy, like different
oh yeah,
ways of kind of expressing yourself, especially for young kids. Maybe they don't have the words, but they'll draw towards it or kind of imagine towards it. So.
yeah. There's a couple national organizations, the Sibling Leadership Network, SibNet, the Sibling Support Project, but there are groups that are tailored to different ages of siblings that provide, some of them are play groups and meetups, some of them are art therapy, some of them are like actual support groups or group therapy, especially for teenagers. That's a great thing. In the absence of that, I would ask through your medical team if they know of any family supports or sibling groups that you could plug into.
So this is a really short passage, and it gets at the concept of the empowerment of information, right? Like we've talked a lot about the supports that are going to be out there, what coping looks like. But every time, eventually, the more I enforce the house rules, the more defiant Alan becomes, right? So Alan's growing up. He cries and shoves you away. The threat of telling mom is enough to stop him at first, but more and more, Alan grows bold and violent. I follow through on my threats and tell mom when Alan hits me or shoves me, but she often dismisses my fears, saying we'll have to work it out ourselves. It's just a phase, Gina. I don't have time to referee, she says. She doesn't know yet that violence is a symptom of Prader-Willi, that left unmedicated, the surges of testosterone will overload Alan's brain like a circuit board. The inability to regulate hormones is a part of the condition. Once Alan reaches adolescence, the fuse will blow. And so I guess I'm curious how you think a proper diagnosis could have helped? And at a broader question, how you've been able to kind of empower yourself with information throughout the process, like rare disease information.
Yeah, so growing up, we knew Alan had some severe disabilities, but we didn't have a diagnosis. He wasn't actually diagnosed until he was in his 30s. And he switched doctors. He moved and switched doctors. And for the first time, a doctor recognized his constellation of symptoms and said, this actually looks like it could be Prader-Willi. It happened to be around the same time that I was looking to start a family. And so they did genetic testing. It gave me a little bit of peace of mind because most times Prader-Willi is a mutation. It's not inherited. I think there are some instances, but they were able to tell us that it was a rare mutation. So it was not something that I was likely to pass on to my kids. But yeah, suddenly I had all this information and context that we didn't have when I was growing up. And looking back, I don't know how much that diagnosis would have changed things for us. It might have connected us to a community of other families that were dealing with Prader-Willi or other similar disorders where we might have gotten some resources and advice. There was a lot of treatments now that didn't exist back then. So, but now it helps make sense of so many things that were just senseless growing up. There were so many things that we assumed were bad behavior or, or we didn't understand why he did so many of the things he did. He had an insatiable appetite and would eat until he was just really violently ill. And I don't think it would have changed the way that for me as a sibling, it wouldn't have changed a lot, but and I had compassion. I think I understood on some level that it wasn't his fault. Like I knew at a very young age that he was not in control of what was happening to his body. But it might have given me a little bit more compassion. I don't know, or the language. And also I think it would have given us a framework, maybe some expectations. Like I think, so many genetic disorders have a spectrum of presentation, but there's some guardrails around what you might expect in terms of, developmental milestones and what they're going to be capable of. And we just didn't have any of those reference points. We didn't really know what the future might look like or what to expect. And so it feels like a gift now. I mean, I'm still really happy to know what I know now about Prader-Willi and just understand. I feel like it's helped me get to know Alan in a way, even though he's not with me anymore. I feel like I know him better than I did when we were kids.
Wow, that's wild. So I kind of have one more thought process, and I've read a lot of memoirs in the last 5 years since becoming a rare mom, and in none of them has nature played such a central character. And so I'll read a passage because it is probably the passage that sticks with me the most, and then I'd love to just hear your reflections on it, whether it's grief or what nature has played in your kind of healing process. Very short passage. If grief had a map, I imagine it would look like this: a serpentine trail that doubles back on itself so many times that even as you walk it, you have no idea where you're going. Yet, when you pull back and gaze at it from a distance, you see the symmetry, the concentric circles, how every meandering step makes sense. When you're inside, you feel utterly lost and alone. And I guess, like, for those of us who are kind of in it, I think we all continue to experience grief at different parts of being caregivers, patients, or siblings. That's just a really beautiful way of saying you're on the path.
Yeah.
Um, but curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think nature has always been really important to me. I think as a kid, I understood in some ways that the outside world was safer than what was happening inside my home. And so I found a lot of peace and I was able to kind of quiet my nervous system outdoors. And then I made a career writing about the outdoors and nature in many ways. And when it came time to find a title for the book, Forces of Nature, it just got me thinking about all the different ways that nature reflects the human experience. You know, Alan was a force of nature. His genetic disability was a force of nature. I think our families of origin are their own forces of nature on our lives. And also, like, nature can be a force for healing. Grief can be a force for, insight and understanding, deeper understanding about ourselves and about the world, not just the human world, but we look at the way the natural world moves through adversity and loss and disaster and how it heals itself. So, yeah, it was important to me to kind of reflect that part of my grieving process because it felt really powerful to kind of look at what was happening outside the world and how it reflected how I felt.
That's perfect. Oh, we have one more question from Sue. All right, let's see here. Thank you for this book and this insightful discussion. Did you have anyone to confide in, or did you ever wish a family member had addressed your concerns head on? I was the younger sibling of dependent, severely bipolar sister, and often wondered what would happen when my parents were gone. Her illness and needs were never discussed in the family. I felt alone when I ultimately had to make the decisions to care for her or for her
Mm.
care. I'm grateful for this support, acceptance, and resources today. So I guess to circle back, who were the people you could confide in, and how did you find ways to address these concerns head on?
Yeah, I'm sorry that you also had to deal with that theme. Yeah, I mean, in the book, I kind of describe a little bit of a thread once I got to high school, once I kind of really gained some independence as a teenager and started to see that other families were not like mine. There was an intervention where some high school friends of mine, and I won't go into a lot of details in the book, but um, reported my family to the school and social workers got involved. But I was so afraid of telling on my family, and especially with my mom's mental illness, I really was afraid of what might happen if I was really honest about how bad things were. So I didn't really share how bad things were. But they didn't remove me from the house. I was terrified that they were going to put me in foster care and then who would take care of Alan and my mom. And so it was kind of a failed intervention. But the one thing that did come out of it was that the school forced me to go to like 6 sessions with a therapist. And I got really lucky that that therapist was incredibly intuitive and helpful and planted some seeds. Again, I didn't confide as deeply as I would have liked to, but I shared enough and she gave me enough tools and seeds that it ultimately allowed me to step away and find safety my senior year of high school. So that was the beginning of kind of confiding. And then as an adult, I have a huge network that I can confide in now. I've kind of been able to really have some witnesses to my story and people that I can talk to really candidly about it now that has been really healing.
How did you cultivate that group? Because you've mentioned that twice, kind of your circle, and I'm curious to hear how that came to
Yeah.
be.
I think like from a young age, even in high school, like I think I attached myself to other families, like to get some of my needs met, and I didn't really know why or exactly what I was doing. But once I moved out, I moved out in the middle of my senior year of high school, which I talk about in the book. And once I got to college, I latched on to friends as like my chosen family. I continued to seek counseling and therapy because I had this good experience in high school with that one therapist. And honestly, a lot of what I did was, like, in opposition to the way that I was growing up. I was like, "Well, I'm gonna do it like, this is the way it was done in my family, I'm gonna do it differently." And so I kind of moved towards what felt unfamiliar as a way of, like, rebelling against the way that I was raised, but ended up being the healthier way to live. And then especially when I had little kids, I joined, like, a new moms group when my daughter was a newborn, and that's when I really, I think feel like I found my people. Like, when you're vulnerable as a new parent, I think that's when those relationships are really precious, and you get to know people really quickly. And a lot of those friendships I've carried through the past 17 years. So,
I've found I can connect with people who know grief, like
yeah.
who have kind of been through something where,
Mhm.
and those relationships just go deeper than surface level and meet my needs as a rare mom
Yeah.
in a different
Yeah.
way.
Yeah, you have like a built-in radar too for like authenticity, you know, kind of a BS meter a little bit. So yeah, that's a gift. I think you can trust yourself to, the people who feel good to be around are the ones that maybe um, are self-aware and know, the beauty and the pain of life.
Like acknowledging the both and. Well,
Mhm.
you are a pleasure to be around. Thank you, Gina, for being here today and spending this time with us and sharing so much of yourself in this memoir. And if you have not read Forces of Nature, it is an incredible read. And truly, without even the connection to Rare, it is so beautifully written. I really had to sit down and take time with it because there are so many passages that took my breath away. So thank you for your writing and for being here. And
Thank you. Thanks, Laura. Thanks to everyone at Nowhere Rare for creating this community. I think it's really amazing.